Hello everyone, welcome to something I'm willing to bet you thought you would never see. Me through the lens of a slightly better camera. I've got my hands on some new equipment. Welcome to the new pad, by the way. That's the bed right over there. That's where the magic happens. Not sex, I do black magic in bed. Been summoning some weird things lately. I guess I did do mouth stuff with a few of them. But today I want to bring back Tekken and Coffee for one episode. It's this series of videos I used to do where I go online with a cup of coffee and look at questions and points made about Tekken and sort of talk about it. I was Googling around yesterday and I found this article, 10 Unpopular Opinions About Tekken According to Reddit. It's by ScreenRant.com, and I just thought it was kind of funny. I don't know much about Screen Rant. I thought they were like a movie review site, but they're doing like a discussion piece on Tekken. I didn't even know that people still write online articles. It's like, who the fuck's gonna read this? I might be the first, but I thought it could make for a fun basis for a video. So we're gonna read this together and see if we can provide some sort of perspective, sort of from the inside of the world of Tekken. But here we go. 10 unpopular opinions about Tekken according to Reddit. Tekken fans have shared their opinions of the classic fighting series on Reddit, from Korean backdashing to Devil Jin. There's plenty to argue over. Don't I know it? So here's opinion number one. And I guess this person has just gone to Reddit and looked for what he perceives to be unpopular opinions and then taken 10 of them and turned it into an article. But the first one says, movement is ache-inducing. Reddit user Leader of the Saviors is pained by the game's movement mechanics. Movement gives you so many hand problems in no time, like KBD is basically made to give you joint pain and stiffness in but a few years. KBD actually isn't made at all. It's an exploit that was discovered. And then because people liked it and it sort of made sense, made the game a little bit deeper and a little bit more competitively interesting, it wasn't removed. At least I think that's what happened. It's not something that the developers thought of and then put in the game. It's something that players discovered. I do a lot of Korean backdashing. I sometimes play Tekken for, hours every day for weeks on end, and I have no issues at all with aches or pains or anything like that. But I have had that in the past. When I was still playing on PlayStation, I sometimes had some issues with my wrists and my fingers, especially when I was doing a lot of practice mode, trying to, master some sort of new technique. And you do the same thing very repetitively, sometimes for hours, Elisa dive kicks for 3 hours in a row. But now I have basically no issues. Everybody has a different body and it's going to be different for everybody. But if you have decent posture and you make sure that you don't keep going, if you do have any aches and pains, it is perfectly possible to play a lot of Tekken and do a lot of movement, do a lot of Korean backdash canceling without having any pain at all. But of course, you have to listen to your own body, and if you have issues, maybe talk to somebody. I know that Adrian was talking about doing some sort of wrist exercises that he does right now. Of course, you don't want to end up with some sort of permanent issue. So if you do, have pain anywhere, obviously be very careful about it. But I think just good posture and setting everything up so that you can sit comfortably is a big deal. But if you're worried about movement being painful, when you practice a lot of Korean backdashes, you get like lactic acid in your fingers, but that's when you're practicing it, when you're not good at it anymore. I sat down a year ago or two because I wanted to see how many Korean backdash cancels in a row I could do before my hands were too tired and I just had to let go. And I did, 70 or more in a row, and then of course my fingers were pretty exhausted. But it's perfectly possible and probably something that you can get used to. So be careful, but it's I don't think it's necessarily something that needs to give you pain. There are just too many moves. Tekken move lists are crazy bloated. I love that characters have 100 plus moves, and I would never want Tekken to be like a lot of other fighting games where you have maybe 12 moves in each character. The move lists are now ridiculous though. It's especially egregious how every character has some flavor to every single move. It's a little bit weird because it sounds like this person is actually saying this is a good thing. It's supposed to be some sort of criticism, but he says, I like the fact that we have huge move lists. I wouldn't want them to be a lot smaller, and it's egregious how every character has some flavor to every single move. That's actually one of the coolest things about this game. We have a crazy amount of moves, but many of them look really good. For example, Bob has a move that is not used by anyone ever. I've never seen anybody use it. It's down forward 3-2, I think. And it's like you can use it for maybe a little bit of combo carry, but it basically doesn't have any application. But Bob sort of kicks and then punches, and then he cocks his hand back and does this little kung fu pose, and it's really cool and flavorful, and you almost never see it. So there's a lot of effort put into the animations. If you're going to have a lot of moves, even more important if you're going to have few moves, the fact that they have so much flavor and they animate in interesting ways, I think is an amazing part of Tekken. It's the way the characters animate look better than basically any other fighting game in the world, I think. But in terms of like having way too many moves or the move list being so long, I think it's actually necessary for a game like Tekken to have very large move lists. Because if you think about it, 2D fighting games, or basically almost all other fighting games, you have normals and then you have special moves. And when you hit with a normal, you get an amount of hits done that will open a window that will sometimes be large enough that you can get one more normal, and then eventually you probably cancel into a super, right? So you snap moves together almost like Lego blocks to create strings. And that doesn't exist in Tekken unless you play one of the 2D characters who aren't, traditionally in Tekken and probably won't be in the future. It's not really this system. So in Tekken instead, we have something known as strings, right? So one move can sort of organically lead into another in this string. But the thing with that's one of the reasons the game looks so good, by the way, because if you look at a 2D fighting game, they will do like a normal and then another normal. And if you slow that down and you look at it frame by frame, you can tell that they do one move animation and then they sort of snap into another, and it doesn't flow or look very natural. And if you play Elisa or Akuma or another 2D character in Tekken 7, sometimes when you get the slow-mo at the end, you've probably seen that, how they do something and then a single frame, it just switches in a very jarring way to the next animation because you did a cancel of some sort. So we have strings, and I think strings are necessary to the system, but then you end up with this issue where if a string only has one path it can go, then it becomes predictable. And being predictable in a fighting game is very dangerous. It's how you lose, right? If there's a string where the second hit is always this duckable high, that's very dangerous. So you want your strings in Tekken to actually branch into different things. It depends, a Punisher can be the same thing every time, and there's a lot of complexity there, but even a 2-hit string, it can branch off from the first hit in a couple of different directions, and then you can do multiple hits and they can branch as well. So something as simple as Zafina's down forward 1, right? It's an essential move to the character, maybe her most important like string or neutral tool, but you can do a down forward 1 by itself, which is what you do most of the time. You can do the down forward 1-4, which is a Punisher and wall splat move and a spin move for combos. You can do a down forward 1-2, and you can stop there, or you can do a down forward 1-2-1 with a final damage hit at the end. Some of those hits are delayable, some of those hits have counter hit properties, and so you're constantly feeling your opponent out when you're applying that string and trying to trick them into making a mistake. So just with one simple tiny poke, because we have these string systems, it turns into a lot of beautiful complexity that I think is really great. But shrinking the move list down by a lot is difficult when the system works like that. But if you're worried about Tekken move lists being very large and very bloated, actually that is not the trend we're seeing for the franchise right now. Because if you compare old legacy characters like, I think Jack 7 is maybe the best example. He has more weird things from full crouch that you will never use than, some 2D fighting game characters have moves total. But he's a legacy character and he's carried all that with him for years. But then you look at the new characters for 7, Shaheen, Claudio, Katarina, smaller move lists, and everything when you do a move, kind of right away it has one specific purpose. Oh, this is the move that does this for this character, right? And there's not that much superfluous stuff going on, so probably the franchise is heading in the direction that this person is asking for. But I think we need these big move lists to preserve what is very special and beautiful about this system, especially in terms of how good the animations look. Opinion number, I think 3. Tekken Tag 2 was the best. And you hear a lot of people say that Tekken Tag 2 wasn't very good and it was a very complained about game. I love it a lot because it was the Tekken game that I first learned when I was trying to get decent at this franchise. It's what I played with my friends when we all got into Tekken. And there's so much that is very special about Tekken Tag 2. Just go and look at a compilation videos of all the tag throws that are in this game. They're all super flavorful, unique animations, and there are so many of them. It's like crazy. Any like tiny lore connection or just superficial connection between characters turns into a really flavorful throw. The main criticism of this game, I mean, people talked about inconsistencies with wall stuff very often and sort of wild inconsistent combo stuff. I actually think that with that many characters and the tag system, the fact that it worked as well as it did, the fact that combos were as consistent as they were, was actually kind of impressive. I didn't have much of an issue with that. It also looks kind of good, but I think there was character models with shadowing and stuff. They looked kind of, kind of like me, like they had a bright light, shining in the face all the time and not a lot of features. But overall, I think it was a pretty good game. It just had this issue where it was out for a really long time. People got kind of tired of it and started wanting the next thing. So by the time I got into it, people were saying, oh, Tekken Tag 2, this old, boring thing that we've had for so many years. Kind of like how people talk about Tekken 7 right now, but I bet that in, many years from now when we're playing maybe the next or the version after that of Tekken, people will look back on Tekken 7 as being, something really amazing, which it is, but it definitely has its problems. But Tekken Tag 2 is pretty cool. Rage arts are bad. They're sick of rage arts interrupting competitive fights. Rage arts slow down the flow of the game a lot. I prefer them becoming fast and unique abilities like rage drives. Well, you already have rage drives, and I agree that rage drives are much, much more interesting and a much better and well integrated comeback mechanic than rage arts. I love rage drives, at least most of them. There's like a trend where a lot of them tend to turn into unseeable snake edges and stuff now, but they're really cool. You take this move that is typical of the character and you soup it up just one time. I think it's a pretty great idea. The thing with rage arts, I saw one person online raging one time saying that he was using his rage art on his keyboard, but he was talking about how this game has just turned into a race for who can get the rage art out the fastest, and they're so annoying and they're so powerful. And that doesn't really make sense when you think about it because, well, first of all, rage arts are extremely dangerous, and in high-level competitive play, they don't see a lot of use. It's kind of rare. You can use them to boost combo damage at the very end, but if you have a good rage drive or you just look for the wall or do something else, you can usually get more anyway. And then if you're just going to gamble on one and hope that your opponent swings, if they don't, then you're going to look like a bit of an asshole. So you have to be careful about that. And you actually see a lot of people trying to bait rage arts when you play in higher ranks right now. And it's kind of, for example, I have a couple of setups for the characters I play, but just Bob doing his headbutt into a forward roll, into forward spinner, people know that I'm rolling towards them and I'm going to do some sort of mix-up. Is he going to go for the big low or is he going to do a mid? I know. I'll just armor through whatever it is and do this rage art, and then I just roll forward, stop, and block. And, I win so many rounds that way. So rage arts, I think, are actually pretty well balanced because they're not that good. You have like specific niche situations you want to use them in, whereas rage drives are both more powerful, more interesting, and just work better with the system. I agree with this thing where something breaks up the flow of the match and you have to watch a cinematic. It looks really cool the first few times you see it, but we've seen every rage art thousands of times now. It's not interesting anymore. It's time we spend waiting. And waiting is very frustrating in fighting games, you know? That's why getting juggled doesn't feel good. And when you have a really long rage art like Marduk, it is really annoying to have to sit there because you know what is happening, you know what the result is, you're just trying to get to it. But rage arts, you know, they look cool in cinematics, and I think that's the main reason they exist at this point. And Tekken hasn't had supers before, so I think it's kind of interesting, but they're pretty well balanced, and I don't think they see a lot of use, honestly, in at least high level play. Mids shouldn't hit crouch block. This is a strange opinion to have if you like to play Tekken. Mids should not hit crouch block. This opinion is certainly contentious. You are aware of how fighting games work, right? Somebody asks. Okay, so I've actually thought a couple of times of making some sort of tutorial for Tekken for somebody who is completely new to the franchise and knows nothing. Like, where do you start if you just have somebody who's completely blank and you just want to go, here's how Tekken works? And usually when you see something like that, they will say, we have 4 attacking buttons corresponding to the 4 limbs of the character. And I don't think that's useful information right at the beginning, really. I think if I had to do a video like that, I would start by explaining that we have attacks in 3 different heights, 3 different levels, high, mid, and low, with, you know, exceptions like special mids. And then I would try and explain how those 3 heights of attack correspond to blocking, you know, crouch blocking and stand blocking, and how that works. I think it's probably the core system in Tekken and the thing that everything kind of revolves around. It's why we have mix-ups and everything else. And if you don't think mids should work on crouching opponents, I'm guessing this is a person who plays a lot of 2D fighting games, because in them, crouch block is kind of the default position that you go to for blocking, and the only way they can break through crouch blocking, you know, use overheads and things like that, depends on the game. Whereas here, you have to be very careful about when you crouch, because mids are very powerful. Almost every character has a mid at 15 frames that will launch you for a massive combo. And that is why we try and force people and trick people into crouching in Tekken, which is very different. But if you were to remove the ability for mids to automatically hit crouching opponents, what would a match look like? I mean, nobody would play that game. It would be completely useless to anybody. It would, you know. But if somebody, if 2 people were to play a match in a game like that, what would happen? Well, probably they would both scramble for a life lead at the very beginning, and then whoever got the life lead would just sit in crouch and wait and try and anticipate an unblockable or some sort of throw maybe that can throw a croucher, and just worry about dodging or blocking that. Another thing is, you know, in 2D fighting games, you have cross-ups, right? So if somebody's blocking in one direction, if you can get behind them, you can do stuff to them in the back. But in Tekken, if nobody's attacking, it's very difficult to cross somebody up, because what we usually do is we walk around somebody who's attacking, or step, and they go past us, and that's how you get the back. But if somebody's just being very defensive and trying to hold on to a life lead, and they're crouch blocking and you can't hit them with mids, it's going to be basically impossible to ever hit them. And if you do try and play together, the game would entirely devolve into this complete focus on counter hits, right? Because it would be, you would have to hit somebody, you would have to hit somebody who was attacking, right? So it would be a completely different game, and I don't think it would be very interesting really to anybody. That's like the core of Tekken. So it's like saying you wish you were playing a different game. KDB is boring. So that's a spelling error, I guess. Korean dashback. Is boring. Goiper of Goit feels that KBDing it constantly and with punishing is a boring and negative playstyle, and it would be considered cheap and boring AF if it didn't require execution. You know, people talk a lot about Korean backdash canceling and movement as being this core of how you play Tekken well, and I think it was much more true in Tekken Tag 2 than it is right now. But if you go and look at one of the world-class masters of this game, if you go and look at Arslan Ash right now and you watch him play a match, He mains Zafina, by the way, who is the backdash character in this game, has the best backdash out of all the characters. You'll notice that he does not constantly just backdash, looking for whiffs all the time. That's not how you play the game, really. Korean backdash canceling is very useful and important, but it's in certain situations, usually when you already have a little bit of space. Otherwise, you're mainly backdashing, I think, a single time and trying to create some sort of sudden whiff. But if I'm just doing Korean backdashes over and over again, I'm actually pretty predictable. My opponent can see how far I'm going and what I'm doing. And if they're trying to get in with some sort of gap closer, they can just, coordinate that and extend whatever they're going to do to where they think I'm going to be after I've backdashed enough. There are not a couple of characters who really do a lot of that, just backdashing and looking for whiffs like all the time, but those are usually characters, I mean, like Kazuya, who's on the screen right there. He's got like these excellent, very explosive keep out moves, and it's very dangerous to try and get in on him. So he's more like he's trying to like create a fence and trying to be slippery. But I agree that you see it rarely, very rarely, but this constant Korean backdash canceling and never engaging, it's not a super fun playstyle, but it turns out that at a high level, that actually isn't how Tekken is played. And you can watch some extremely high level play where they, do a backdash a couple of times per round in specific situations. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't learn it. I think it is a very useful technique, and it's going to do you a lot of favors to get good at it, but it's sitting around and doing it all the time doesn't really make sense. It doesn't do much for you. You should be doing it for a reason, Juggles and long combos suck. I don't think that's an unpopular opinion about Tekken. I think it's one of the most common criticisms of Tekken 7, and it's something that I've talked about a lot myself, and almost the entire fan base seem to agree that combos have gotten very, very long. And I said that earlier about waiting. I have a video somewhere on the channel where we talked about, I found this scientific study where people had like academically researched what makes people frustrated and angry when they play video games. And it turns out that the big thing that people can't stand is loss of control. So you have a character or something that you're manipulating on the screen, and then control is taken away from you and you can't do anything about it. When you get a blue screen on a computer, or a Xerox machine is acting up, it's like the most frustrating thing ever, and people go berserk. But it's this, you can't do anything about what is happening to you. And combos, rage charts as well, but combos definitely are a big thing when it comes to that. You get launched and then you just have to sit there and wait for the opponent to be done. And sometimes, you get launched again for the Oki and you spend 10-20 seconds. If you get launched by Geese, 10-20 minutes doing absolutely nothing, and you're losing, and you're completely powerless to do anything about it, right? So I would be happy for combos to be shorter. I'm willing to bet that that's going to be a defining feature of whatever happens next for Tekken, because look at Soul Calibur 6. I mean, it's a dead game at this point, but I think it was fantastic in ways. And you had like 2, 3, maybe 4 hit combos in that game, and they were super fun to do. And I remember my little just frame kick with Songmina, and I got a nice little spark, and I could get like 1 guaranteed follow-up hit. But just think about, for example, moves like 4-2 from Jack. It's like a big counter hit thing that you do, and then he gets the guaranteed big boot. Hitting with something like that is super fun. It's at least as satisfying as doing, a bread and butter combo, right? So I think shorter combos can be very fun. I mean, sometimes when you play like a more technical character, if you play like Elisa, or maybe you play a Mishima and you do something really sick with a combo and you convert it, or you do something difficult, that's obviously a lot of fun as well. But I mean, a lot of the time it's just people trading these bread and butters that you've seen a million times, especially if we're talking about these new Tekken 7 characters, like, for example, Claudia, where it tends to be, or Shaheen, where it tends to be the exact same combo every single time. It's not cheese, you're just not good. If you lost to cheese, you were the worst player. Anyone who complains about characters carrying their players is an entitled scrub at heart. Well, you have to define cheese, right? If you're doing, like it says here, slippery kicks with Eddie. super risky, and of course Eddie can get launched for doing that. You should block slippery kicks and then you should launch him. So if you lost to that, maybe you can make the argument that, or you eat snake edges, for example. It's like the classic example, right? You should be blocking them, and it's you who are bad. You should be parrying the junkyard. If you don't, then it's your bad, right? But you know, complaining about characters carrying their players, there are plenty of characters who definitely carry their players in their game, not because they're cheesy, because they have completely unreasonable recovery speed on fast pokes like Lydia, because they have completely unreasonable range and pushback on standard tools like Fuck 'em Lam, because they can completely neutralize stance mix-ups by pressing back into, like Leroy, for example. There are many different examples of how you can get away with stuff, and it's not because the opponent is bad, it's because your character design is flawed. So, I don't know, but of course, I mean, that's the old debate, right? If you're eating snake edges and big lows, then that's your bad. But what if it's Devil Jin's Helm Sweep and it's unseeable, you know? So it's gonna come down to your definition of what is cheese and what is cheap, right? But if a game is perfectly balanced, then I think it becomes a more interesting discussion to have. Devil Jin and Kazuya are cringy characters. I don't think that's a controversial opinion either. I mean, I think they look like something you would think, something that was cool if you were 12 years old in the 90s, maybe. It's a lot of chains and leather and zippers and belts. It's very Japanese. And it's also tropey. It's very tropey. You know how in Japanese media there are basically 10 different characters that can show up, and everything is just versions of them. And you have these main characters that always have to struggle with some sort of inner monster that comes out, right? And you've got a Devil Jin, and there's an evil Ryu, and there's a Shadow Jago, and the list goes on, you know. Naruto has that yellow cat in his belly button, and Ichigo has some white jizz that comes out of his eye and turns into a mask or whatever. It's this very tired trope, but people love that in Japan in those games and anime and things. That's kind of what they want to see, and everything is just kind of takes on that. So, I mean, Devil Jin and Kazuya, always angry, you know, the inner devil, the glowing red eyes and all the rest of it. Something a little bit more. I mean, for example, the jacket that Jin has in this game, the black and red leather with the spikes on the shoulders. If you were walking down the street and you saw somebody wearing that, you would be so embarrassed for them, right? So, I mean, yeah, something a little bit more tasteful. You know, it's like a lot of creativity, but not a lot of taste, maybe. Something a little bit more subdued could be cool for those characters. It's going to be really interesting to see what they do with these designs in the next game. I think Kazuya might go bald in the middle, start resembling his dad a little bit, would be cool. I think this is the final one. Tekken is actually good as it is, and that's probably an unpopular opinion. But like I said earlier, I think many years from now, people will look back on Tekken 7 as being an amazing game, which it is. And, you know, I'm guilty of this. I talk about the flaws in this game all the time. But the reason I think we do that isn't because this game is bad. It's because we feel like this game is something absolutely spectacular that is so much worse than it could be. And it hurts especially, I think, when it's worse than it was in the past. If you see the game get gradually worse, or you see all of this amazing potential that isn't being realized because the people who create the game and have all the control, and the people who love it on the other side, you know, the consumer side the most, have different views on what the game should be and what direction it should go in. And that's been like one of the main controversies, the main thing people talk about when it comes to Tekken. That's monetization and balance and DLC. These additions coming out for the game, they obviously have to make money making it, but if those of us in the core audience who really love the game get frustrated with it, you know, are they going to lose their audience? It's this weird balance thing. Yeah, I think whatever happens to the franchise next, it's going to be absolutely fascinating, because this game is very, very successful and very good, but it has these strange choices when it comes to the monetization and the way it's progressed over the years. But despite the fact that it's been that problematic, it has been very successful. Are they going to double down on things like that? Should we expect every DLC character that comes out for Tekken in the future to be unreasonably good and then hard nerfed multiple times within a month or two? Things like that, you know. Are we going to see the game become more casual? Are we going to see NFTs in Tekken, you know, blockchain stuff? Are we going to have an in-game store? Will there be loot boxes for the customization system? Or, you know, companion apps for your smartphone? I hope not, because I think 2 players, 2 characters on a screen in a well-balanced and solid system is sort of the core of why fighting games are fun in the first place. And you can, you know, tack all this stuff onto it, but it's not what makes the games magical. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Here at the end, I'm just going to mention, you know, I've been away for a little while now. It's because I've been moving, but I'm back in my native Europe, and I'm having an absolute blast being back here. I'm setting up a little recording studio, actually. Got myself a green screen and everything, so I'm going to make a lot of stuff going forward, and it's going to be super exciting. A lot of Tekken, some other games, some other fighting games as well. So hopefully you stick around for that. But like I said, thank you so much for watching this. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys again very soon.